Welcome. I want to introduce you to something called a taxonomy of significant learning. We've talked about learning in a variety of ways, talked about learning in terms of definition, learning as a cyclic process, and those kinds of things. And I want to share something called a taxonomy of significant learning. Now, before we do that, I want to remind you of the definition of taxonomy. Taxonomy is defined as the practice and science of classification of things or concepts, including the principles that underlie such a classification. Originally, this was used primarily for biological classification, so classification of animals or plants or something like that, taxonomy of animals, taxonomy of plants, and so on. But in more recent times, people are using this in a broader sense, again, this idea of classification of things or concepts, including learning and components of learning. You've already been introduced to a taxonomy, Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. This is the revised version. And again, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. We talked about lower level thinking skills, higher level thinking skills. We talked about the relationship of these higher level thinking skills with what we might think of as critical thinking. You've already been introduced to this idea of a taxonomy, and this is a tried and true taxonomy. But this really only relates to cognition or thinking, or levels of thinking, lower levels of thinking skills, and higher level thinking skills. So, in a number of years ago now, this gentleman by the name of D. Fink came up with something called the Taxonomy of Significant Learning. And it was published in this book, Creating Significant Learning Experiences, an Integrated Approach to Designing College Courses, or, in your terminology, college modules. So the things that we teach. What he wanted to do was to go a little bit beyond Bloom's taxonomy. Not that there was anything wrong with Bloom's taxonomy, but again, it was all about thinking, and there's certainly a lot of other elements to learning that we would like our students to engage in and get value from. So he wanted to consider things, skills, tolerance, character, ethics, a whole range of kinds of things that he wanted to think about that go beyond and extend what we think of as Bloom's taxonomy. And he did this in thinking of learning defined in terms of change. So for learning to occur, there must be some sort of a change occurring in the learner. And that gets back to a lot of these kinds of things. And so what he came up with is 6 kinds of significant learning, and he put those in the context of a taxonomy of significant learning, and there's 6 components to that taxonomy. So what I want you to do is, if you don't already have a template for this and perhaps a handout or something, take a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and draw a big circle, as big as you can, inside that piece of paper. Again, a blank piece of paper. A large circle, and then what we're going to do is we're going to divide it into 6 equal sections. And it's going to look like this, a pie with 6 parts. So draw a line down the middle this way, one across this way, and one across that way, and you have your 6 segments or 6 parts of this taxonomy of significant learning. So draw a big circle on a piece of paper, and then segment it into these 6 sections by drawing 3 lines through it. All right, so we're going to go through these one at a time. We're going to start with fundamental knowledge, foundational knowledge. And what he's talking about is understanding and remembering information and ideas. So this is the ability to understand and remember important concepts and facts and terminology and principles. It provides, the other point is, the word is foundational knowledge. It provides the basic foundation and understanding that is necessary for all the other types of learning. The next part is called application. He called it application. So we're talking about thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking, practical thinking, skills, management of projects, and so on. So we're talking about applying what has been learned. So applying this foundational knowledge. Developing skills and managing complex assignments and tasks, applying these things to in various ways, intellectual ways, physical ways, and social ways. Learning in different ways, practical thinking. So for example, solving problems or making decisions. Critical thinking, Where's critical? There it is right there. Analyzing and creating issues and creating situations. And then creative thinking being the idea of generating new ideas and products and perspectives. So different kinds of thinking here. If you think about these for just a moment, what you realize is that's a lot like Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, but we've only filled out 2 of the pieces of the pie here, so there's 4 more to go. So this kind of encompasses his vision of Bloom's taxonomy and how Bloom's taxonomy fits into his taxonomy of significant learning. The next one's called integration, which kind of gets a little bit into an extension of Bloom's taxonomy, connecting ideas, people, realms of life, understanding the connections and interactions between ideas and perspectives and learning experiences and what he calls realms of life. The learner needs to be able to see and understand the connections between different kinds of things and apply principles that they have learned to different kinds of things, different ideas, different sets of people, different realms of life, and so on. And if you, again, we've introduced this in other videos at other times, this difference between how novices think and learn by just looking at little bits of information, many times independent of other bits of information, versus the expert who understands all these interactions and relationships between bits of information, either in some hierarchical manner or understanding that, golly gee, there's different kinds of information, I've indicated by different colors, how they're all interconnected and so on. So that's part of what he's talking about with regard to the integration. Human dimensions, the next part. Establishing effective relationships with others. So learning about oneself and others, establishing relationships with others. And then on a personal dimension, learning about oneself, creating and taking responsibility for one's own life and learning. Learning about and changing oneself. So learning more about ourselves, not just learning stuff for to pass the exam, but learning how does that relate to me and how is that going to impact me. Using reflection and feedback from other people to identify areas of my own strengths as well as areas of improvement where I might be able to improve, and getting that from feedback from other people. And then the social dimension is really more interacting with other people. So this gets into those ideas of interpersonal skills, something that employers really value a lot. Caring is the next part. Developing new feelings, interests, and values. So the idea of caring about something new or caring about something in a different way or a new way. Developing new feelings, interests, values about learning. Not just, oh, gee, I'm learning just to get past the exam, but I'm really excited about learning about this thing. I developed a new interest because of something I learned in this module. Becoming excited about an activity or a subject, wanting to be a good learner, wanting to be able to master the material that's being presented and achieve a high standard for themselves in terms of their learning. So caring about their learning, not just doing it simply to pass the exam or, golly gee, I'm going to get a job if I graduate. It's I'm really excited about learning. I'm excited about the topics and the subjects and the information that I'm getting from my courses, for my modules and my lessons. And then finally, learning how to learn. Each of us is spending our life learning, and we have the opportunity in college, at university, of helping those students really learn how to be an effective learner for the rest of their lives, long after they graduated and left our classrooms. So becoming a better student, inquiring about a subject, self-directed learners, engaging in self-regulated and deep learning, so I know how to learn. Inquiring, constructing knowledge by engaging in a subject or topic. Maybe I'm majoring in this particular area, but I find something else over here that I'm really interested in, so I know how to go learn about that, and I'm excited about learning about that. Being a self-directed learner, a reflective practitioner of learning, and developing a learning plan or agenda, so I know when I go out there in the real world, I know how to continue learning. And then continuing the learning about a subject long after they've, again, graduated or finished with your module. So being excited about those kinds of things. Okay, sometimes this taxonomy of significant learning, foundational knowledge, application, integration, human dimension, caring, learning how to learn, is presented like this in the context that the significant learning part comes where all these things come together. So just to kind of give you another perspective on what this significant learning is. So accommodating all of these components of learning in terms of what they're learning about. You may not be able to do that in a single lesson. You may not be able to do it in a single module, but certainly in terms of a program of study, your students should be learning in all of these components of the significant learning. So this is the taxonomy of significant learning. Foundational knowledge and application, we indicated that's not at all unlike, or I should say in a more positive way, very similar to Bloom's taxonomy. Integration is then integrating that into other components beyond simply the little bit that you may be teaching. There's a human dimension, there's getting the students to care about their learning, to care about the knowledge that they're gaining, and then learning how to learn. So, I have an assignment for you. This is it. I want you to choose one lesson that you teach, something that you're really comfortable with, something that you've done maybe a number of times, and yeah, I do that pretty well. So I'm going to choose that lesson. Now, presumably, I'm making an assumption here, but presumably you already have embedded in that lesson a fair amount of foundational knowledge. And you probably have done some things that lead the student into understanding how to apply that knowledge. But you probably have not spent a lot of time thinking about, with that lesson, how do I integrate in integration in terms of the learning, caring, human dimension, learning how to learn. So what I want you to do is I want you to take two of these four, integration, caring, human dimension, learning how to learn, from Fink's Taxonomy of Significant Learning, from this lesson. Again, you've already presumably got these things, and write down how you might integrate those into your lesson so that it enriches that lesson and accommodates a broader range of this taxonomy of significant learning. So pick a lesson you're comfortable with. Presumably you already have foundational knowledge. Hopefully you have some application. If not, maybe put some of that in there. And then pick two of these four areas. And how would I change that lesson to get the students really interested to the point where they want to continue learning about it? They want to continue learning about it. Maybe they start to understand how that lesson relates to other people or relates in a different way to themselves and so on. So go back and think about these kinds of things and write that down. And hopefully then, eventually, integrate that into next time you actually teach that lesson. Good luck.